I cannot make realistic portraits, I'm not that skilled. But I love playing with metaphors, finding deep personal symbols, interpreting my inner reality through art journaling, which is my biggest source of mental and spiritual support. Last week I faced a few anxiety attacks, fatigue, emotional burnout, and all that could be very challenging if I hadn't decided to make a series of inner self-portraits with no expectations, restrictions, or rules. I just showed up every day to check on myself through art, and it changed my perspective. In this video, I want to share with you why I have become such an advocate of inner self-portraits. In the first part, I will show you my experiment, every self-portrait that I've made. In the second part, I will break down all the tools and techniques that I used. It will be a very doable guidance in case you want to make this practice your own. And in the third part, there will be key insights and takeaways about what this practice can bring. If you're new here, welcome, I'm Anna, and I started this channel to share art journaling tips and inspirations, and also how I build my personal art practice for self-exploration. There are timestamps in the video, so you can navigate it the way you want it. For this challenge, I used a sketchbook that was gifted by my friends back in the Republic of Georgia. My husband and I moved from there to Serbia in September and are now in the process of settling down, which is the main source of my stress. For holding myself accountable, I made a little introduction page using scrap paper. Day 1 kickstarted the whole self-portrait adventure. I woke up with a horrible migraine, and while waiting for the pill to work, I needed to do something with my hands to distract myself from the pain. I used a white gel pen to sketch what I saw from the window, an old shaggy building. Somehow I felt that it was representing my pain in a way. It was dark and imposing. Then I added clouds as a bright and more optimistic counterweight, and below the clouds a schematic simplified me. I used paper with messy pattern that I created with brush pens and elements from a free magazine I grabbed in a store. By coincidence, it had an article there about migraine, and this is how it's written in Serbian. And as a symbol of relief, I made this element interactive and hid a little piece of the cloud as a reminder to myself that sooner or later, pain subsides. The self-portrait of day 2 was more of a soothing experience than an explorative one. I craved calm and quietness, and hence is the use of blue color, which in my personal symbolic system represents the lulling serenity. And for myself here, I used a freehand cutting technique, which I will explain in the second part of the video. I used the paper with a dot pattern I created with markers, fragments from the same free magazine, and a little note to live accordingly. I took this as a reminder to respect the woman I am, the yin part of me, who was the one that craved calm and softness and roundness that I got translated into shapes here. And I drew an eye to make the whole portrait alive. Day 3 brought me a self-portrait that very accurately represented the emotional burnout that I felt. I used one single word here. It says tired in Russian, which is my mother tongue. I used black, slightly textured gouache background and an alteration of contrasting layers. Pale pink linen fabric scrap, dark photo of a bird. I'm not sure what bird this is exactly. I just saw myself in the expression of your eye. And I drew an intentionally schematic body with stretched legs to make it more expressive. When I finished with the legs and the word, I felt so understood by myself. It was a very comforting feeling, as if I've given myself permission to feel tired. For the scribbled part, I used a white Derwent drawing pencil, and to attach the fabric, I used white glue. Day 4 was the pinnacle of my emotional struggles, hence is the word that I've chosen to add. It says too much. For this collaged self-portrait, I used papers that I painted myself with gouache. The background is also gouache, slightly textured. One big eye here represents my sensory overload, and hence the other eye is closed. When I was in the process of making this spread, I didn't give it much thought. I just chose intuitively, and then when I finished and looked at everything, it made sense, and I saw what really I was feeling. Sometimes it's hard for us to acknowledge what is going on with ourselves, especially if we cannot stay alone or there's a lot of external mess and fuss and responsibilities, errands and tasks. It can feel like we are drowning. This is how I felt. But this self-portrait helped me see and acknowledge myself in all that. The self-portrait of day 5 at first seemed too intense, but after I made it, it occurred to me that it's the beginning of acceptance and settling down with the new circumstances in my life. I made myself into a figure that uses the flower to unite two opposites. I love using blue and red as contrasting colors, both in my wardrobe and for art too. I find them very whole. I don't know how to express this feeling correctly. I created all paper patterns using gouache paints. I diluted it with water for a softer and smoother effect and used it dry for more texture. And the words here say, the shape and movement of chaos inside. I used the curve of the figure to create movement with the text. In this self-portrait, I saw the unity of opposing forces or elements, cold and warm, movement and stillness, chaos and order. It was a reminder not to reject one of those forces because without it, the other stops existing too. On day 6, I used my two favorite human elements to depict in art, hands and eyes. I find them the most expressive, very subjectively of course. Besides, to draw your own hand is the easiest. You can just trace it and there you are on the page already. For the background, I used watercolor and the hands were made from the gouache painted paper. White gel pen for the eyes and two small collage elements. Red star for the color balance, not because I'm following any color rules, but because I felt like adding something small and colorful and spark-like. When I finished with the eyes and hands, I still couldn't see what message/reminder I'm sending with this to myself, and I decided to add a text. I picked blindly from my tin of text fragments, and this was one word that my hand found there, temporary. And then everything made sense instantly. I don't want to go deep into my personal philosophic pondering. I'll just say that I think about transience a lot. It's my anchor to stay present, but sometimes I still forget about it. And this self-portrait came as a yet another reminder. On day 7, I knew what I wanted to explore. The topic of aging and acceptance of that. I've taken a decision to grow out my gray hair. I did it before when I was in my mid-30s, but then began to dye it again. And now I want to revisit this experience and see how much grayer or whiter I've become. So here, I addressed my hesitation to lose color. First, I made everything black and white with silver background. This figure symbolizes me. I used mini sewing machine kind of thing, another linen fabric sample, and here the eye that I thought symbolizes the societal opinion, but then it struck me that it's actually me too, judging myself and doubting my decision to go gray again. And after I realized that, I felt like adding gold in here as some soothing inner light that has color and that is not going anywhere. During this week, I used some tools and techniques that I found very helpful, both for the process of creation and also for making time for it. I broke each self-portrait session into 2 steps. In the evening, I would create a background and I would go with whatever paint I wanted to use. And my main advice here is do not think. Empty your mind and go with whatever your hands want to go with. A background becomes an invitation to make something. And next morning, I would do the second step. While I was having my morning coffee, I would make a self-portrait and then I would take maybe just a few minutes to interpret everything. All this is not a time-consuming endeavor at all. By breaking this process into 2 steps, I made it very accessible and doable. And I know that this may sound super simple. I mean, like, there is no intrigue in here, just 2 steps, but trust me. This works so well. And if you like it, for example, you can change the time of the day for each of the 2 steps. For example, you can make a background in the morning and then go back to it in the evening to create the actual self-portrait. When and if you decide to introduce collage into your inner self-portraits, don't make any marks. Just cut it out and then watch how wonderfully accurate your self-portrait becomes. As someone who was and still is quite dependent on neatness, precision, and control, I have found so much freedom and inspiration in letting my hands do whatever they want to do. All the doodles and blurbs and strange mess, I let them do anything they want, especially for this inner self-portrait challenge. For example, with this last self-portrait, I was not intending to make it into a human-shaped figure. I just had an A4 sized paper and I had scissors and I began to cut, and then I looked at what I cut out and then I shaped it more, and this is what I got in the result of that cutting experience. And the same thing was here. Yeah, in this one. In all of them, but this one in particular, I just cut out whatever I felt like making, just in the realm of a portrait making things. And then I found a place for each element. And if I didn't find a place in this particular session, I would just put scraps into my folder to use them later in different art journaling sessions. It's very simple. It's easy, approachable, and it doesn't eat away the time, your precious time. You just create and see what happens. I started making my own papers and patterns only a few months ago, but I found such incredible inspiration in it. You don't have to use any fancy paper, just go with whatever you have. And I experimented with gouache, acrylic, watercolors, brush pens, markers. Every material that can leave a mark can work, trust me. And you can create a whole library of your own papers and textures and patterns, and this is what I need to do right now, because I think I had maybe like 5 papers or so that I used for this particular challenge, but even this limited number of papers and patterns can work. I also found this pattern making process very useful for trying out new materials and techniques, and it's also a very meditative and sensory rich experience, especially if you create textures, and I'm just in love with it. Most of my patterns were made on self-adhesive paper. And this was an accident, but I actually found it so useful and so handy, especially for this experiment with the inner self-portraits. I went to a stationery store and I wanted to buy just simple thin printer paper, but I didn't want to get like a huge and heavy pack. And I saw that there were tiny little packs there, maybe like 10 or 20 sheets in each. And I bought one, and only after I got back to the apartment, I discovered that those was those were sheets of self-adhesive paper. But I highly recommend trying to use it, especially if you have access to it, because using self-adhesive paper is very convenient, because you don't have to worry about having a glue, or if you, for example, you think that you won't have enough time or space, if you don't want to create any extra messiness. And also any paint sits on self-adhesive paper just wonderfully. There is no problem in creating different textures and patterns on it. To add an extra layer of meaning or to inspire a thought or a feeling, I recommend using the Tinmancy tool. And Tinmancy is a joking name, a play on the word bibliomancy. And if you didn't know, bibliomancy is a practice that is kind of religious, I think, as far as I'm right. I don't know. It's when a person opens a religious text on a random page and then takes whatever is written there as a guidance. When I was a child, I would do that with books of poetry or aphorisms. So here I have a tin of just random words and phrases that I cut out from a book that I used for collages. I didn't want to pack the whole book for when we moved countries, so I just cut out whatever caught my attention and placed them in the tin. And during this inner self-portrait challenge, on 2 days, there were only 2 days with these phrases, I would just pick randomly and blindly whatever my hands wanted to find there. And that was super fun, and surprisingly, it was very insightful. So I recommend using something like that if you want, of course. An inner self-portrait doesn't have anything to do with realistic depiction of yourself. It's the expression of your presence at this point of space and time. So find symbols and metaphors that represent who you are here and now. If you cannot think of anything, just depict yourself through the objects that you use on a daily basis, such as your favorite food, clothes, colors, or songs, or movies, whatever you want, or even plants that you have near you. Start with something like this and then see how your own story of yourself unfolds in every new inner self-portrait that you make. You are your own interpreter, and no one can see you better than you do yourself, and you decide which parts of yourself you want to make visible for others or for your own eyes and your own heart. I also found it useful for this particular challenge to use layering as a form of symbolism too. So I perceived the layers, the composition that I created as a symbol of me allowing different aspects of life coexist together without trying to mute any of them. It was more like about nurturing more acceptance of my life at this particular moment. The most important tip here: ditch perfectionism, smoothness, or streamlined elements, unless you think that these streamlined elements represent yourself. Then embrace it. But if not, if you feel like a mess, embrace the mess. Last week, my life was a complete mess, and by pouring all the messiness on the page during this challenge, I gained so much relief in mental and emotional sense. Key insights and takeaways. This inner self-portrait adventure is a great way to experiment and try new things that you haven't tried before. Before this challenge, I had no idea how acrylic paint will look on the paper, and it looked wonderful to my taste, of course. I had no idea how stitching would appear on a very quite thick paper. It was the last the last self-portrait, so I just decided to use a very confusing a tiny little machine that I bought out of thirst for experimentation, and I absolutely loved the result. I found that using new techniques and new tools that perhaps you've been saving because you didn't feel too confident about them, so using them in this particular adventure can loosen you up. Like, you won't be worried about the result, you will embrace the flow, the special state of experiment and not knowing what awaits you on the page as the result. And you will definitely see that whatever you make on the page, it will speak to you one way or another. It's a deeply therapeutic adventure because it helps reconnect with yourself in a gentle, non-judgmental, and curious way. But for it to be therapeutic, you need to ditch perfectionism again, and you need to be utterly honest, even honest with your fear. When I sat down to make a self-portrait every morning, I was thinking, like, what the hell am I doing? But then, especially by the end of the week, I knew that whatever I decide to put on the page will make sense to me. And in each self-portrait, inner self-portrait that I've made, I saw a very important reminder that I needed to hear, to see, I don't know, on that particular day. Making inner self-portraits is a wonderful practice to experiment with over a short period of time, because using it within longer time frames can feel too intense and overwhelming. Self-exploration needs a balance too, and sometimes you just need to stop staring at yourself and just let yourself be. I can say for sure that these 7 self-portraits have provided me mental, emotional, and spiritual support that I haven't even expected. Let me know in the comments if you got inspired to give this adventure a try, or maybe you have already tried it, and I will be very curious if you decide to share some tips and insights and techniques maybe down in the comments. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, dear fellow creatives. I'm wishing you a beautiful day where you can have a few moments to connect with yourself, maybe through making some art, or through finding a moment of stillness, or through moving or eating something delicious, whatever you decide to choose today. And I will see you in the next video. Пока-пока!